Hello there, John Coturillo here, the counsellor of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. And as usual, thank you to everybody who makes my work possible. In today's episode, I'm going to be exploring a comparison between what it means to be righteous and what it means to be nice or pleasant. Now, as usual, if you have concerns about yourself or somebody else, please do not take what you find on the internet or in the media as advice. Please seek advice from a professional or somebody else that you trust. I'm going to start this reflection with a story. Some time ago, I was in the process of forming a relationship with a particular stakeholder for my work, and I was talking about my lived experience with them, and they asked me outright, "What you've experienced, John, is quite substantial in terms of the impact on your psychological health, even if it was in your past. Are you actually able to handle that in being a counsellor and helping other people handle their psychological problems?" Now, of course, the answer is yes, I am able to handle it, and my clients will certainly testify to that. But after answering, I told them that the question that they asked me demonstrated far more trust than many of the other people of whom I'd either become aware or become acquainted in this industry. Now, why did I trust this person more? The answer is mindset. In explaining this further, I do have to make brief mention of the fact that language is what we call a reification. A reification is a philosophical or cognitive tendency to treat something as physical or real when it's only theoretical or abstract. Words don't actually exist, and qualities like the qualities of a person's personality don't actually exist in a physical sense. They're theoretical. Yes, we know they're real. Yes, we experience them, but we cannot define them in terms of absolute objective properties. We cannot actually observe them necessarily through the senses or define them in the same way that we would define physical objects or physical events. So language only means as much as we intend it to mean. We decide on words and we decide on what they mean. That said, language is only as useful as the amount of agreement that people have on what words and concepts mean. Otherwise, if we didn't have agreement, then the language would be useless because we wouldn't be able to communicate consistently. When one person uses a particular part of language or symbol, another person couldn't discern what it meant. But when we use language to refer to similar phenomena, we can say that those phenomena constitute a single psychological concept. And being nice and being righteous are two such concepts. As a counsellor, I receive referrals from others, and I also like to help my audience become aware of resources and other providers which may be beneficial, as well as help other individuals and organisations gain exposure. That's why I host the Your Listener Partner Network, and I'd like to thank my partners for their support. I'd like to introduce Ali's Place Counselling. On the scenic Mornington Peninsula, Ali's Place provides individual, couple and family counselling with specialisation in relationship therapy. Their devoted team provides a warm, welcoming and safe environment and treats each client as an individual to help them to tell their unique stories, untangle their situations, build healthy relations with themselves and others, and ultimately find a route to where they would like to be. They work with a range of different concerns and teach crucial communication, conflict management and problem-solving skills. They are also home to the Ali's Place Academy, developing the skills of both newer and more experienced therapists. Find them at www.alisplace.com.au. As I've stated before, life is a complicated and often dangerous place. And we know implicitly that life is a complicated and dangerous place that can be uncomfortable and unpleasant at times. If we were constantly thinking about how anxiety-invoking that was, we would never be able to survive because our minds would be too focused on that rather than on the acts that constitute survival. So, we have hedonistic and avoidant tendencies. Hedonistic tendencies being the tendency to seek pleasure, seek what makes us feel good because it helps us to be distracted from those anxieties while feeling overall that life is worth living. And avoidance being disengaging with what makes us uncomfortable regardless of whether it may actually be helpful to us. We all have them in some way, and it's part of human nature. But if we don't allow them to be controlled in an appropriate fashion, then we will eventually develop a habit of avoiding those things which could actually help us grow, may even be necessary for our practical survival simply because they're uncomfortable. And by the same token, we often assume that just because something is pleasant, we should immediately pursue it because it's healthy. When we refer to someone nice, what do we often think of? Someone who smiles, someone who pays us compliments, gives us gestures or does acts that feel good to us or are helpful to us, doesn't want to say bad things about other people. Now, it's not to say that a nice person is also not righteous and that a righteous person can't be nice. But using being nice or pleasant in and of itself as an end game is not healthy, because if we only act based on what feels pleasant, or we assume is going to be pleasant for someone else, or what we assume is going to make other people like us because our qualities make them feel pleasant, then we're not thinking closely enough about what is in our own best interest and what is in other people's best interests. What we don't often realize is that, first of all, what we often ignore, as I've stated before, is what's in our best interest or other people's best interest is not necessarily what feels most pleasant. At the same time, we also tend to assume that if someone is not acting in someone else's best interest or making a mistake, we tend to stigmatize it and attach a negative label to it or say that they must be a bad person. This is the result of a psychological phenomenon called the just world hypothesis, or the just world error. It means to implicitly assume that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. Therefore, if something bad happens to someone, then it must be because they deserved it. If something good happens to someone, it must be because they deserved it. It was justified. And by the same token, the inverse, if we believe that something we consider bad is associated with a person, such as making a mistake, which we tend to conceptualize as something undesirable, then that person also must be bad. It's a psychological tendency to help us understand the world in as simple terms as possible, because the less we have to think critically, the easier it is for us to get on with life and conduct our survival. But, as usual, critical thinking is actually more healthy. The reason this is relevant is that often what we may do as a psychological defense mechanism is just put the label nice on someone when they do what's pleasant, because we don't actually want to admit that what that person is doing, even though they don't intend to do it, is actually a mistake or is not necessarily in their own or somebody else's best interests. What people don't seem to be able to understand is that you can acknowledge somebody's positive qualities and their less desirable qualities as well. You can acknowledge that someone makes a mistake without labeling them a bad person or saying that they intended it. There's an old adage that says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Sometimes you may think that the way that you function is objectively in someone's best interest, or you may assume that you're doing what is nice and therefore people will appreciate it, and that it's what's in other people's best interest or your own. But that's not necessarily the case, and often isn't. The concept of being nice and the mindset associated with it can conflict with being righteous. The problem is that when your mind is attuned to a certain ideas, certain concepts, or certain aspects of your functioning, it tends to then create a narrow focus on it to the exclusion of other information. Again, an evolutionary mechanism to keep us focused on what's important so that we don't get distracted by too many extraneous properties and factors. But at the same time, that also means that if we adopt a certain mindset, the implications of that mindset then may unintentionally affect other aspects of our lives without us even being aware of them. Before we explain how this works, what does it mean to be righteous? As opposed to being nice, which is to be pleasant, righteousness is more conscientious and more detailed. It involves critically thinking in a considerate manner, not being impulsive, but pursuing what is objectively best and fair for all the people involved in a situation. And to be righteous, we have to draw on a number of different sources of information and ideas. We need to consider objective logic, some subjective judgment, morals, social norms, etc. We have to consider all this in deciding what to do. Whereas nice is, by comparison, quite psychologically superficial and may even be impulsive. Here are some concrete examples of which you may be familiar to illustrate these points. Remember the story that I told at the beginning of this episode. The person to whom I gave that reflection said, "I'm not sure what you mean by that." And I said, well, think about this. There are plenty of people who will do what is considered in popular thought to be nice according to someone's group membership. And so upon meeting me, they may start to behave in all sorts of stereotypical ways because they've been taught that that's appropriate when you meet somebody with the same lived experience of mental illness as me. They might start to use certain buzzwords that the media have taught them to use because they're considered to be nice or the right things to do when you meet someone. They might have, if they're a larger health organisation, they might have slogans on their website that say, "We accept everyone, including people with lived experience." The executives of such organisations may be seen in the media using all the different key words that are considered in popular culture to be signifying as someone who is culturally aware of these issues. How many of them, though, actually care about learning what an individual's needs are and doing what is in their best interests? Based on my experience, the odds aren't good. Most people who conform to these stereotypical notions of what is considered right by certain groups in popular culture are more interested in looking good and appearing to be nice than they are actually taking action to help people. Notice the difference in mindset. The person to whom I was talking recognized objectively, whether it feels good or not, objectively, that mental illness affects us in ways that sometimes we can't control, and recognized not every person is capable of every pursuit. And therefore, if a person has a mental illness, they may not be necessarily suited to certain pursuits. But the key word here is necessarily. They didn't assume that I was or wasn't. They asked the question. Their mindset was, most likely, one of acknowledging reality and being honest. And the reason that that's trustworthy is that if you are somebody who acknowledges reality, you're more likely to consider that when making a decision that could affect someone else. And when you consider reality, you don't just consider what is in your own best interest or what might benefit you, you also consider other people. At the same time, if you are someone who values honesty, that means that if something happens of which I need to be aware, then that person is more likely to come to me and talk about it with me rather than taking action without considering how that might impact me. Those concepts of considering reality and honesty have associated qualities and associated actions that characterize those qualities. If you consider what is objectively good, you are considering you are not the only person in the world. Your actions impact other people. If you are going to take an action that impacts another person, you should consider them, consult them if necessary, or possible at least. And if you value honesty, that means being honest, even if it may not necessarily be comfortable. I don't know for certain, but it's quite possible that that person didn't necessarily feel comfortable asking me that question because they didn't know how I would respond or if I would take offense to it. But the fact that they were willing to anyway signifies an underlying mindset of pursuing what is righteous. By comparison, if your mindset is focused on drawing influence from sources of popularity, then the likelihood is that you don't understand the underlying psychology of what you're doing. Popularity and concepts that become popular don't usually become popular necessarily because they're correct or logical, but because they appeal to people's emotions and people's underlying primal desires to have quick answers about what to think about the world. Now, sometimes what is correct does become popular, but all too often it's based on emotions, it's not based on objective logic. So if you are someone who has involved themselves in such an environment in which you are taught, just say these words or just show these gestures and you will be nice to everyone and everyone will love you, the likelihood is that your mind has learned to follow that without question. And because those concepts don't arise from objective logic, you'll be taught the words, you'll be taught the gestures, but you won't be taught what they mean, and you won't be taught why it's important to acknowledge those issues. Because if you were taught to acknowledge that importance, you would also be questioning, why do we need to use these words when they don't actually do anything? Why shouldn't we instead actually do something constructive, practical? In that way, being nice doesn't mean being righteous. Let's consider another possibility. Imagine that you have an employer who does things that on face value might seem nice to you, like smiling lots, or giving you lots of bonuses, or sending you gifts. Yes, they are nice things to do, and I wouldn't begrudge someone for doing that. But what about if they also act in a way that doesn't necessarily consider your best interests in ways that potentially might be more important than the domains of your life involved in, say, giving gifts or receiving bonuses? What about if there's a problem in the workplace and you tell your employer, there's a problem here, but they don't listen to you? Yes, they still smile and says, yes, we'll get onto it, but then they don't. And let's say also that they're not doing it because they don't care about you. In their mind, they care about you, but they haven't learned to discern the objective logical differences between these two phenomena. Which is more important? Tending to what you say in the workplace so that they can stop problems from happening that could potentially cause you greater harm, or exchanging pleasantries with you and giving you nice things. The long-term ramifications of not listening to you are probably going to be worse. You can live without gifts and bonuses, but if someone is not fundamentally listening to you, then what that demonstrates is they don't believe you're important enough to pay attention, to give you their time. And again, even if they don't realise it, even if they're not doing it intentionally, if you genuinely care about people, being nice is not the only factor that you consider. You consider what is actually right by this person. If I care about this person, what is going to lead to constructive relational outcomes? Listening to them, considering their needs, involving them in decisions. Think about also, as it applies to the workplace, someone who demonstrates professional boundaries. Now, as a counsellor, I have to demonstrate very strong professional boundaries, but this is true in a lot of different professions. As a counsellor, I present very differently to how I present to my friends. I use language in a certain way in my communications that is very formal and professional. I ensure that my appointments with clients don't simply start and finish when we feel like it. They start at a set time, they finish at a set time. I'm not available at all hours of the day. I'm not an emergency service. I'm not capable of providing that. I have my working hours. There are certain problems with which I can't help a client because it's not appropriate for me to. If I wanted to be nice, I could give a client everything for which they asked, but that's not what's in their best interests. It's not in my best interest, and it's not in the best interest of the profession. Now, people have told me this before. Being more relaxed makes people trust you more. And I vehemently disagree. I've had fantastic relations with my clients over the years, and other counsellors similar to me have done as well. And I am someone who some say is old-fashioned or highly formal. Why do people trust me and trust other counsellors like me? Because we implicitly associate ideas with mindsets. If a person sees a counsellor dressed professionally and using professional language, but that is still relatable to the client, and has those professional boundaries, but at the same time is listening to them and is personable, they see someone who is making a conscientious effort to help them, and they implicitly know that that's what's in their best interests, hence they will trust them. What they also see is someone who is confident in their ability to help, thereby they're displaying that confidence. If they see someone who is treating them the same way that they would treat their friends, that doesn't display confidence, it doesn't display an understanding of psychology, it doesn't display the mindset for work. That's not trustworthy. People might say formality isn't nice or is uncomfortable, but the proof's in the pudding. The counsellors who produce the results will be the ones who have a professional mindset and who demonstrate it in their behaviours and in their presentation. It may not be stereotypically pleasant, but it is righteous, and a client implicitly detects that and their mind attunes to it accordingly. Also think about romantic relationships. We all love it when people agree with us, right? It feels nice. But can you trust a partner who always agrees with you? From experience, I can say no. If a partner doesn't feel confident disagreeing with you, it may have something to do with them, and I'm not judging, but if they don't feel confident disagreeing with you, what it can indicate is that they also don't place importance on telling you what you need to hear. And so if there is a problem in the relationship, they may not speak about it until it's too late and there's already been damage done. And you may not have intended for there to be a problem there. All you needed to do was be made aware of it so that you could address it. Relationships are characterized by trust. If your partner genuinely trusts you, they will tell you if they disagree with you. If they have issues with trust, again, that may not be their fault, but the quality of the relationship is likely to suffer if a person doesn't feel complete confidence that they can speak their mind honestly without you reacting aversively. Now, you do have to give them a reason to be confident. You have to display trustworthiness, but if someone doesn't trust you, that may cause issues later in the relationship. Yes, it may feel nice to agree with you, but you're not going to grow as a person, and you're not going to get a sense of what reality is if you live in a contained world in which people just agree with you. A final aspect of being nice to consider is the motive that some people have for presenting as nice. Have you ever heard of a nice guy? A nice guy is a stereotype of a man who thinks by being pleasant, women should want to date him, and when they don't date him, he complains and says, well, I'm a nice guy. It must be because women don't like nice guys. It is a stereotype, and yes, there is a female equivalent, but some people will ask, how can you not like me when I'm a nice person? I can't say this for everyone who says that or who feels that way, but You have to be reflective and understand, are you being nice because you want people to like you? Because that's not the right reason to be nice. If you are displaying any kind of pleasant quality to someone, it should be because you believe it's genuinely in their best interest, or because it's a kind gesture that would actually be helpful to that person. It shouldn't be because you want people to like you. If you want people to like you, you have to give them a reason to like you. Being honest, responsible, kind, compassionate, not exploitative. Those are the types of qualities that are actually likable. If you've done that and people still don't like you, then most likely that's their problem, it's not yours. But if your mind is focused on being nice because you think it will make people like you, you're most likely going to either have more people dislike you because they're going to realize that you're just trying to exploit their feelings towards you, or you're going to be attracting people who exploit what you have to offer them but then never give you anything in return. You have to have the right motives. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As usual, if you have concerns about yourself or someone else, please seek advice from a professional. And if you have anything to say about the podcast, if you'd like to give feedback, if you'd like to present an idea for something for me to discuss, if you'd like to be a guest or collaborator, or if you'd like to disagree with me, please feel free to contact me. I love to hear from my audience. And until next time, take care.